The first time my son told me not to come near him at school. I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. Because I thought he was just growing up. If only I had known that one sentence would become the beginning of losing him. People always say a mother's love is unconditional. They're right. But nobody tells you that unconditional love sometimes means standing outside someone's life, praying they'll let you back in. My name is Eleanor. I'm 68 years old now. People who meet me today probably see an old woman with wrinkled hands, worn-out shoes, and gray hair that never seems to stay in place. They don't see the thousands of nights those hands spent washing dishes until 2 in the morning. They don't see the scars hidden beneath my sleeves from years of factory work. They don't hear the alarms that woke me every morning at 4:30. They only see an old woman. But once, I was simply a young mother trying not to let her little boy know we were poor. My husband died when our son, Daniel, was only 3 years old. A drunk driver. One phone call. One hospital hallway. One signature on a piece of paper. And suddenly, I wasn't someone's wife anymore. I was a widow with $43 in my purse and a frightened little boy sleeping on my shoulder. I remember looking down at him that night. His tiny fingers were wrapped around my sweater. He whispered in his sleep. "Mommy? I'm here, sweetheart. Daddy coming home?" My lips trembled. I kissed his forehead. "No, baby. Tomorrow?" I couldn't answer. Instead, I held him tighter while tears quietly soaked into his little curls. The next morning, I promised him something. "I'll take care of you." He smiled the kind of smile only children can give. The kind that believes every promise. And I spent the next 25 years trying to deserve that trust. During the day, I cleaned offices. At night, I waited tables. On weekends, I stocked shelves at a grocery store. 3 jobs. Sometimes 4. Coffee became my breakfast. Hope became my dinner. Sleep became a stranger. Yet somehow, Daniel never noticed. Or at least, I tried my best to make sure he never did. Every birthday had a cake. Every Christmas had presents. Sometimes those presents came from secondhand stores. Sometimes I repainted old toys until they looked brand new. Sometimes I skipped meals for an entire week just to buy him the sneakers every other kid already had. When he opened them, his eyes sparkled. "You got them?" I laughed. "Of course." He threw his arms around me. "You're the best mom ever." I closed my eyes. For just 1 second, I forgot how tired I was. Children don't remember the sacrifices. They remember how you made them feel. And every hug from him paid for another month of exhaustion. When Daniel turned 10, his teacher called me. "Mrs. Parker?" "Yes?" "I just wanted you to know your son is one of the brightest students I've ever taught." I cried all the way home. Not because of the compliment. Because maybe, just maybe, every blister on my hands had been worth it. Daniel dreamed big. He wanted to become a lawyer. He would sit at our tiny kitchen table reading books that looked much too difficult for his age. Sometimes he'd ask questions I couldn't answer. "Mom, what's constitutional law?" I laughed. "I have absolutely no idea." He laughed too. "That's okay." Then he'd explain it to me like he was already a professor. Those were my favorite evenings. No television. No expensive vacations. Just macaroni on chipped plates and a little boy whose dreams were bigger than our apartment. Whenever the electricity bill scared me, I'd look at him studying. And somehow, the fear became fuel. Years passed. Daniel grew taller. His voice changed. The little boy who used to hold my hand now walked a few steps ahead of me. I told myself, that's normal. That's what growing up looks like. Then came middle school. One afternoon I had saved enough money to buy his favorite chocolate muffins from the bakery near my second job. I walked to school still wearing my cleaning uniform. My shoes were stained with bleach. My hair smelled like disinfectant. I didn't care. I just wanted to see my boy smile. I spotted him standing with several classmates. I waved excitedly. "Daniel." His head turned. For one beautiful second. His face lit up. Then he looked around. His smile disappeared. His friends looked at me. Then at him. One of them whispered something. They laughed. Daniel walked toward me quickly. Not smiling anymore. His voice was lower than I'd ever heard before. "Mom. I brought your favorite muffins. You shouldn't have come." "Oh." I thought. "You could have waited until I got home. I just wanted to surprise you." He glanced back at his friends. Then he looked at my uniform. My shoes. My old purse. His cheeks turned red. "Please." His voice almost cracked. "Don't come here dressed like that again." For a moment. The whole world became silent. The children behind him kept talking. Cars kept driving. Birds kept singing. But inside me, everything stopped. Still. I smiled. The same smile mothers wear when they're trying to protect their children from seeing their own hearts break. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." He took the muffins. "Thanks." Then he walked away. Not looking back once. I stood there holding the empty paper bag. The breeze carried a few crumbs onto the sidewalk. I whispered to myself. "He's just embarrassed. He'll grow out of it." I believed those words. I needed to believe them. Because I had no idea that this wasn't the worst day our relationship would ever see. Years later, he wouldn't just be ashamed of my clothes. He would become ashamed of me. And the phone message I would leave behind would become the last time my son ever heard my voice. The morning after Daniel asked me not to come to his school, I woke up before the sun, just like always. The alarm rang at 4:30, but I had already been staring at the ceiling for nearly an hour. Some wounds don't let you sleep. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself for a long time. The cleaning uniform hung loosely from my shoulders. There was a tiny bleach stain near the collar. I reached for it with my fingers and smiled. "So, this is embarrassing now." The words came out quietly. Not angry. Just tired. Then I shook my head. "No, Eleanor. He's 14. Teenagers say things they don't mean." I splashed cold water on my face. By the time I left for work, I had convinced myself that nothing had changed. That afternoon, Daniel came home. I had already made spaghetti. It wasn't fancy. Just noodles, tomato sauce, and a little ground beef I'd bought after skipping lunch for 2 days. The smell filled our tiny apartment. Daniel dropped his backpack near the door. "Something smells good." I smiled. I figured the future lawyer deserved a nice dinner. He laughed. "There you go again." "What? Calling me that?" "Well." I placed the plate in front of him. "I have to practice saying, 'my son, the attorney.'" He rolled his eyes. "You sound like an old lady." I gasped dramatically. "I am an old lady." He laughed harder. For a moment, everything felt normal again. The sound of his laughter wrapped around my heart like a warm blanket. I memorized it without realizing I was doing so. Because one day, that laughter would become a memory I would chase in silence. Life moved quickly after that. Daniel entered high school. His grades were excellent. Teachers adored him. Neighbors praised him. Every report card felt like another reminder that all those double shifts had meant something. I kept every certificate. Every ribbon. Every photograph. I bought a cheap plastic box from the dollar store and labeled it Daniel's future. Whenever I felt exhausted, I'd open that box. I'd look through his achievements. We're getting there. One rainy evening, I came home soaked from work. The bus had broken down. I'd walked nearly 3 miles in the rain because spending money on a taxi meant less food for the week. When I opened the apartment door, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by college brochures. His eyes were glowing. "Mom." I dropped my bag immediately. "What happened?" "I got invited to an early admission program." I froze. "You did?" He handed me the letter. My hands trembled so much I could barely read it. Halfway through, the words became blurry. Not because the ink had faded. Because tears had. "You did it." He smiled. "No." He reached across the table. "We did." I couldn't hold them back anymore. I walked around the table and wrapped my arms around him. He hugged me tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you." I closed my eyes. If life had ended in that moment, I think I would have died believing I had succeeded as a mother. But life doesn't end during the happy chapters. It waits until you're comfortable. Then it turns the page. College acceptance came. So did tuition. The numbers on that bill stole my breath. I sat alone that night with a calculator, unpaid bills, and a notebook filled with desperate math. No matter how I rearranged the numbers, they refused to work. The next morning, I walked into the bank. "I'd like to refinance my house." The young banker looked surprised. "You'll be paying much more in interest." "I understand." "And at your age." "I understand." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" I smiled. "My son got into law school." His expression softened immediately. "Oh." He looked back down at the paperwork. "I'll do everything I can." 3 weeks later, the papers were signed. The little house my husband and I had dreamed of paying off one day was no longer truly ours. But Daniel never knew. He simply received the tuition payment. One evening he hugged me. "I don't know how you always figure everything." Neither did I. I only knew that mothers somehow learn to make miracles out of empty pockets. The first year of college changed him. Not all at once. Little by little. Like autumn leaves changing color so slowly you don't notice until the tree is almost bare. Our phone calls became shorter. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom. How are classes?" "Busy." "Are you eating?" "Yeah." "Sleeping enough?" "I have to go." "Okay. I love you." A pause. "You too." Click. I would stare at the silent phone for several seconds afterward. Then I'd smile anyway. He's studying. He's busy. That's a good thing. I kept making excuses for him. Because accepting the truth felt impossible. During his second year, he came home for Thanksgiving. I spent 3 days preparing everything. Turkey. Mashed potatoes. Pumpkin pie. His favorite cinnamon rolls. I even borrowed my neighbor Margaret's nicer dishes because mine were chipped. When he arrived, he looked different. His clothes were expensive. His watch probably cost more than my monthly rent had years ago. He hugged me politely. Not tightly. Politely. "You look nice," I said. "Thanks. You've lost weight." "Everyone works out." "I don't." He smiled faintly. I noticed. I laughed anyway. The joke landed somewhere between us. Then disappeared. During dinner, he kept checking his phone. Buzz. 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 I pretended not to notice. "So?" I asked. Have you made good friends? Yeah. What are they like? They're different. In a good way? They're successful. I smiled. I'm glad. He hesitated. Then he looked around my tiny dining room. The faded wallpaper. The old refrigerator humming loudly. The cracked picture frame holding our family photo. His eyes lingered on everything. Almost like he was seeing it for the first time. This place hasn't changed. No. I smiled proudly. It's still home. He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly looked back down at his phone. A few minutes later it rang. He stood immediately. I have to take this. He walked outside. The call lasted almost 40 minutes. I sat alone at the dinner table. The turkey became cold. The candles burned lower. I reached across the table and placed another cinnamon roll onto his plate. Just in case he came back hungry. He finally returned. I'm sorry. It's okay. There was a networking opportunity. Oh. He grabbed his coat. I actually need to leave. I blinked. Tonight? Yeah. I thought you'd stay until Sunday. I can't. What about pie? I'll get some next time. He kissed the top of my head. Thanks for dinner. The front door closed softly. I stood in the quiet house. The turkey was barely touched. The pie remained whole. His coffee cup was still warm. I wrapped the leftovers into containers far too large for one person. As I placed them into the refrigerator, I noticed something sitting on the counter. His college scarf. I picked it up, held it against my chest, and smiled through tears. He'll come back for it. He never did. Months later, when I mailed it to him, he didn't even mention receiving it. I told myself he had simply forgotten. But deep inside, a mother's heart was beginning to understand something her mind still refused to believe. My little boy wasn't just growing up anymore. He was slowly learning how to live a life that no longer had room for me. And the day I would unexpectedly walk into that new life would leave a scar neither of us could ever erase. The first time I saw the world my son had built for himself, I almost turned around before walking through the front door. Not because I wasn't proud. Because I suddenly felt like I didn't belong in it. Daniel called one Saturday afternoon. His voice sounded rushed, but cheerful. Mom? Hi, sweetheart. I've got some good news. You finally became a lawyer? He laughed. I passed the bar. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I cried. Real tears. The kind that come from years of praying. You did it. I told you I would. No. I wiped my face with the corner of my apron. I always knew you would. There was a brief silence. Then he said something that made my heart leap. I'm having a celebration next weekend. Oh. I guess, you can come. I wouldn't miss it for the world. After we hung up, I danced around my little kitchen. Actually danced. A 68-year-old woman spinning in worn slippers while soup nearly boiled over on the stove. My neighbor Margaret knocked on the door after hearing the noise. Eleanor? I opened it with the biggest smile she'd seen in years. My son did it. I knew he would. We're celebrating next Saturday. Margaret hugged me tightly. I'm so happy for you. I don't have anything nice to wear. So we'll fix that. The next morning, Margaret insisted on taking me to a thrift store. She held up dress after dress. No. No. Absolutely not. Finally she found a soft navy blue dress. Simple. Elegant. Almost new. I looked at the price tag. $22. I quietly placed it back. It's too expensive. Margaret rolled her eyes. Oh, stop. I can't spend that much. You aren't. Before I could protest, she walked to the register. Eleanor. It's my gift. I stared at her. You've helped half this neighborhood over the years. I just babysat. You babysat for free. I cooked. You cooked when people were sick. I wasn't expecting anything. Exactly. She smiled. Now let somebody love you back. I couldn't stop crying. Sometimes strangers become family. Sometimes neighbors become sisters. The following Saturday, I curled my hair as best I could. It didn't cooperate. It never had. I polished my old shoes until they almost looked new. Then I wrapped Daniel's graduation gift. A leather notebook. Inside the cover I'd written, "For every victory you've earned, and every dream you haven't dreamed yet. Love always. Mom." It wasn't expensive. But every word came from my heart. The celebration was held at an upscale hotel downtown. The lobby sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high I wondered who ever cleaned them. People walked confidently in tailored suits and elegant dresses. I suddenly became very aware of my purse. Of my shoes. Of my hands. Hands that looked much older than the rest of me. A young woman smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for Daniel Parker's celebration." "Oh, of course." She pointed toward the ballroom. As I approached the entrance, I heard laughter. Music. Glasses clinking together. I peeked inside. There he was. My little boy. Except he wasn't little anymore. He stood confidently among lawyers, business owners, judges, and well-dressed guests. Everyone laughed at something he'd said. His smile lit up the room. My heart nearly burst with pride. "That's my son." I whispered it without realizing. An elderly man beside me smiled. "He must have wonderful parents." I smiled back. "He had a wonderful father." "And his mother?" I looked through the doorway. She just tried her best. Before I could walk in, Daniel saw me. For one brief moment, his smile disappeared. He hurried toward me. "Mom." I hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you." He hugged me back. But only for a second. Then he gently pulled away. "What are you doing here?" I laughed. "You invited me." "Oh." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Right." His eyes quickly scanned the room behind him. Then back to me. "Listen." "What?" "There are some important clients here." "I know." "So." He lowered his voice. "Maybe don't tell everyone you're my mom." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "They wouldn't understand." I stared at him. "What wouldn't they understand?" "It's complicated." "No." My voice trembled. "It isn't." He sighed. "Mom, please. I don't want people asking questions." "What questions?" "You know." "No. I've worked hard to build a certain image." His words landed like stones. "And I." He hesitated. "You don't really fit." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I looked down at my navy blue dress. The one Margaret had bought. Suddenly, it felt old. Cheap. Too plain. I looked at my shoes. At my hands. At myself. Then I looked back at my son. The same little boy whose scraped knees I'd kissed. The child I'd carried through fevers. The teenager I'd believed would outgrow his embarrassment. I forced a smile. "Oh." He reached for my arm. "I didn't mean." "It's okay." "No, Mom. I understand." "You do?" I lied. "Of course." Because mothers become experts at lying to protect their children. Even when the child is breaking them. I handed him the wrapped notebook. I brought you something. You didn't have to. I wanted to. He accepted it. Without opening it. Thank you. I'll just head home. You don't have to leave. But. He glanced toward the ballroom. I should probably get back. I nodded. Go. He looked relieved. Relieved. Not sad. Not guilty. Relieved. That hurt more than anything he'd actually said. I turned around before he could see the tears. As I walked through the hotel lobby, I heard applause erupt from inside the ballroom. Someone shouted. Speech. I stopped. Just for a second. I imagined him standing on that stage. Confident. Successful. Everything we'd dreamed. I whispered toward the closed doors. They're applauding you, sweetheart. Then I smiled through tears. They should. Outside, rain had started falling. I hadn't brought an umbrella. By the time I reached the bus stop, I was soaked. An elderly man waiting beside me noticed. You came from the hotel? Yes. Wedding? I smiled faintly. No. Birthday? My son's celebration. You must be proud. I've never been prouder. Did he introduce you to everyone? For a long moment. I understand. But he didn't. No one could. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. I held on to the empty gift bag that had carried Daniel's present. It was all I had left from the evening. When I unlocked my front door, the house greeted me with silence. I hung my wet coat, made myself a cup of tea, and sat alone at the kitchen table. Across from me, his chair was still there. The same chair he'd used since he was 12. Without thinking, I placed another cup on the other side of the table. Then I laughed softly at myself. Old habits. I poured the tea back into the kettle. As I reached to put away the extra cup, a sharp pain shot through my chest. It stole my breath for a moment. I grabbed the edge of the counter until it passed. There you go again, I whispered to my body. You've been working too hard. I convinced myself it was exhaustion. Stress. Age. Anything except the truth. Because if I admitted something was wrong, who would I tell? Not Daniel. He was finally living the life I'd sacrificed everything to give him. I wouldn't become another burden. I made myself one promise that night. The next time my son saw me, I would make sure he had absolutely nothing to feel embarrassed about. I had no idea. That promise would quietly begin the final chapter of my life. The pain in my chest came back 3 weeks later. This time, it didn't leave after a few minutes. I was stocking shelves during the late shift at the grocery store when a box of canned soup slipped from my hands. The cans scattered across the floor with a loud metallic crash. I bent down to pick them up. Halfway there, the room tilted. The bright fluorescent lights blurred into streaks. Someone shouted my name. Eleanor. I tried to answer. Instead, my knees gave way. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed. The smell of antiseptic filled the room. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside me. A nurse noticed my eyes open and smiled. Welcome back. What happened? You fainted. Oh. I tried to sit up. A sharp ache stopped me. The nurse gently pushed me back against the pillow. Easy. A few minutes later, the doctor walked in carrying a folder. He wasn't smiling. Mrs. Parker. I've lived long enough to know the difference between good news and bad news before anyone says a word. Doctors try to soften their voices, but their eyes always tell the truth first. He pulled up a chair. Mrs. Parker. Just tell me. He nodded slowly. We found something during your scans. I folded my hands together to stop them from shaking. What kind of something? A tumor. The room became very quiet. Even the beeping of the monitor sounded farther away. Is it? I couldn't finish the question. He answered it anyway. It's advanced. I looked toward the window. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently across the gray sky. People walked by the hospital carrying coffee cups. Laughing. Talking. Living. The world hadn't stopped. Mine had. How long? He hesitated. It depends on how treatment goes. Please. He lowered his eyes. Without aggressive treatment. He didn't have to finish. I already understood. After a long silence, I asked the only question that mattered. Will I still be able to work? The doctor blinked. Mrs. Parker. I have bills. You need rest. I have a mortgage. You need treatment. My son doesn't know. He looked surprised. You haven't told him? I smiled sadly. He finally has the life he deserves. You deserve support too. I looked at my wrinkled hands. No. He deserves peace. The doctor sighed. I think your son would want to know. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because he still believed children always rushed toward their parents in moments like these. Sometimes. Life isn't that kind. I'll think about it. He handed me several brochures. Support groups. Treatment options. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed. Because I had. Every room suddenly carried memories. The kitchen where Daniel had done his homework. The hallway where I'd measured his height every birthday. The living room where we'd watched old Christmas movies under one worn blanket. I touched the marks on the wall showing his growth. Age 6. Age 10. Age 15. I rested my fingers beside the tallest mark. You grew taller than me. I smiled. You always wanted to. That night I called Daniel. The phone rang 4 times. Voicemail. Hi, sweetheart. I almost told him. Instead I said. I just wanted to hear your voice. I hung up before the beep. He called back 2 days later. Sorry, Mom. It's okay. I've been buried in work. I know. Everything all right? There it was. The perfect opportunity. I opened my mouth. The words wouldn't come. Instead I asked. Are you eating properly? He laughed. You sound exactly the same. I hope so. Mom. I'm seeing someone. My face lit up. You are? Yeah. Tell me everything. Her name was Victoria. She worked in corporate law. Smart. Elegant. Successful. He talked about her for almost 20 minutes. I listened to every word. Not because I cared about where she vacationed. Or what kind of car she drove. I cared because my son sounded happy. And hearing happiness in his voice was enough to make me forget the pain spreading through my own body. I'd love to meet her someday. A brief silence followed. Maybe. That tiny word settled heavily in my chest. Not now. Not soon. Just. Maybe. Weeks passed. Chemotherapy began. I scheduled every appointment on my days off. No one at work knew. I wore long sleeves to hide the bruises. I smiled when customers complained. I laughed with cashiers during lunch breaks. People kept saying, "You look tired." I'd smile. Just getting older. The truth felt too heavy. Margaret noticed my hairbrush. It was full. Far fuller than usual. She quietly picked it up. Then looked at me. Eleanor. I looked away. She didn't ask. She already knew. She wrapped her arms around me before I could pretend. I cried into her shoulder for the first time in years. Not because I was afraid of dying. Because I was afraid of leaving without hearing my son call me mom the way he used to. Between tears, I whispered. Promise me something. Anything. If Daniel ever asks. She immediately shook her head. No. Margaret. No. You deserve better. I don't want him feeling guilty. He deserves the truth. He deserves happiness. And what about you? I smiled weakly. I've already had mine. She looked at me with tears running freely down her face. No. You were his happiness. A few days later, I decided to visit Daniel's office. Not to tell him. Just to surprise him with homemade chicken soup. He always loved it when he was stressed. The receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment? No. I'm his mother. Oh. She called upstairs. Then covered the receiver. Please have a seat. A few minutes later, Daniel stepped out of the elevator. He looked surprised. Mom. I made your favorite soup. He glanced around the busy lobby. Several coworkers walked past. One smiled at him. Another nodded toward me. Daniel's smile faded. You really should have called first. I thought. I'm in the middle of something. I won't keep you. He accepted the container. Still looking uncomfortable. Then a beautiful woman approached. She wore a tailored white suit and carried a stack of files. Daniel. She looked at me. Oh. Daniel hesitated. For one painful second. Then he smiled politely. Victoria. This is. His words caught in his throat. I waited. Heart pounding. This is Eleanor. Eleanor. Not Mom. Not my mother. Just. Eleanor. Victoria, how do you know each other? Before he could answer, I saw the panic in his eyes. And in that instant, I understood exactly what he was afraid of. So I rescued him. The way mothers always do. I smiled gently. I've known him since he was little. Daniel looked at me. Our eyes met. Mine were full of love. His were full of shame. And neither of us realized. That would be the last time he ever saw me standing on my own 2 feet. The day I called myself Eleanor instead of Mom. Something inside me quietly let go. Not my love. That could never disappear. Just the hope that one day my son would proudly say those 3 simple words again. This is my mother. On the bus ride home, I rested the empty soup container on my lap. Daniel had remembered to hand it back before returning upstairs. Thanks. That was all he'd said. No hug. No drive safely. No I love you. Just. Thanks. I traced the tiny scratch on the plastic lid with my thumb. It still smelled faintly of chicken broth. I smiled to myself. At least he ate. Even then, I searched for reasons to be happy. That's what mothers do. They build joy out of crumbs. The treatments became harder. Food lost its taste. Coffee, which had carried me through decades of long shifts, suddenly tasted like warm water. Walking across my tiny living room left me breathless. Some mornings, getting dressed felt like climbing a mountain. Still, I went to work. Not because I was strong. Because I had no choice. One afternoon, my manager, Mr. Collins, stopped me as I was putting on my coat. Eleanor. Yes? You've been here 23 years. I smiled. Has it really been that long? You've never called in sick. I guess I like working. He looked at me for a long moment. No. You like surviving. His words hit closer than he knew. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. I'd like you to take some paid leave. Oh, I couldn't. You can. I still have rent. It's already approved. I stared at him. I don't understand. He smiled. The staff pitched in. My eyes widened. What? The cashiers. The stock boys. The bakery ladies. They all wanted to help. I shook my head. No. I can't accept this. Mr. Collins folded my fingers around the envelope. Do you remember Melissa? The young cashier? The single mother. Of course. When her son was in the hospital. He smiled softly. You worked double shifts for 2 months so she could stay with him. I was only helping. And when George lost his wife. I lowered my eyes. He needed someone. You cooked dinner for him every night. I made too much soup. Mr. Collins laughed through watery eyes. No. You made too much kindness. I couldn't speak. For years. I had believed nobody noticed. Apparently. They had noticed everything. As I left the store, every employee was waiting outside. Someone hugged me. Then another. Then another. Melissa whispered into my ear. You taught me what a mother looks like. I cried all the way home. Not because I was dying. Because complete strangers had made me feel more seen in one afternoon than I had felt in years. A month later. I lost my hair. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror holding the last few strands in my hand. For several minutes. I simply looked at my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't the Eleanor I recognized. She looked smaller. Older. Fragile. Margaret quietly entered behind me. Neither of us spoke. She picked up the electric clippers. Would you like me to? I nodded. Tears rolled silently down my cheeks as the last of my hair fell away. When she finished, she kissed my forehead. You are still beautiful. I laughed softly. I look like a wrinkled potato. She burst into laughter. A real laugh. The kind that catches you by surprise. Soon. We were both laughing so hard that tears streamed down our faces. Then, without warning, the laughter became crying. We held each other in the middle of my tiny bathroom. Neither of us pretending to be brave anymore. That evening, Margaret handed me a small wrapped box. Open it. Inside was a soft knitted cap. Light blue. My favorite color. You made this? She nodded. My grandmother taught me. I put it on. Do I look fashionable? You look like someone who's going to boss angels around. I laughed. Oh, I'd definitely organize heaven. You'd probably start cooking for everyone. And complain that nobody eats enough. For a few precious minutes. The illness disappeared. We were just two old friends laughing over nothing. Sometimes. Those ordinary moments become the most extraordinary memories. Winter arrived. Snow covered the little house where Daniel had grown up. I decorated a tiny Christmas tree. Not because I expected company. Because traditions deserve to survive, even when families drift apart. I wrapped one present. Just one. It was for Daniel. Inside was the old leather notebook I had given him at his celebration. He had accidentally left it unopened in the gift bag that day. I had discovered it weeks later while cleaning. The ribbon was still perfectly tied. He had never even looked inside. I untied it carefully. Opened the cover. Read my own handwritten message. For every victory you've earned. The ink blurred beneath fresh tears. I retied the ribbon exactly as it had been. Maybe one day he would finally open it. On Christmas Eve, I baked cinnamon rolls. The same recipe Daniel had loved since he was 7. The smell filled every room. For a moment, it felt like time had gone backward. I set 2 plates on the table. One for me. One for him. I knew he wasn't coming. Still. Hope is a stubborn thing. The phone rang. My heart jumped. Daniel? Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I know. Victoria's family invited us to Aspen. That sounds wonderful. I won't make it this year. That's all right. Of course. There was a pause. Then he asked, how have you been? I looked at the bottle of medication beside my plate. At the hospital appointment written on tomorrow's calendar. At the scarf covering my bald head. Then I smiled. I'm doing just fine. Good. I worried. The words warmed me. Just for a second. He still worried. Maybe not enough to visit. But enough to ask. That tiny piece of love was enough for me. I love you, Daniel. Voices echoed behind him. Someone called his name. I have to go. The line went silent. He hadn't said it back. I stared at the phone for a long time. Then I whispered the words for both of us. I love you too. Late that night. The pain became unbearable. Margaret rushed me to the hospital through falling snow. The emergency room lights blurred above me as they wheeled me down the hallway. The doctor leaned over my bed. Eleanor. I looked into his eyes. This time. I didn't need him to say anything. I already knew. The illness had moved faster than anyone expected. He gently took my hand. I think it's time to call your family. I closed my eyes. Family. Such a beautiful word. Such a lonely one. After a long silence, I opened them again. Can I borrow your phone? Of course. He handed it to me. I stared at Daniel's name on the screen. My thumb hovered over the call button. Then, very slowly, I pressed something else instead. Voicemail. Because deep in my heart, I was terrified that hearing a machine answer would hurt less than hearing my own son say he was too busy to come. I took one trembling breath and began recording the message that would change his life forever. The sound of the beep echoed softly through the quiet hospital room. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I had spent my entire life finding the right words for my son. And suddenly, I realized these might be my last. I closed my eyes. Smiled. Then I began. Hi, sweetheart. I hope I didn't wake you. You've always hated answering your phone when you're sleeping. A tiny laugh escaped my lips. I still remember when you were 5. I'd have to tickle your feet just to get you out of bed. You'd grab your blanket and tell me 5 more minutes. You never changed. I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the winter wind brushing against the hospital window. I don't know if you'll hear this today. Or next week. Or maybe much later. But if you are listening, I want you to know something. You have never been the reason I smiled. You have always been my reason. A tear slipped down my cheek. I've been thinking about your father a lot lately. I think he'd be so proud of you. He always wanted you to become someone who could stand tall in this world. You did. You really did. I looked toward the ceiling. I just wish he could have seen it. The doctor quietly stepped outside, leaving me alone. He understood. Some conversations belong only to love. I know life has been busy. And I know success asks for sacrifices. So please, Don't ever apologize for chasing your dreams. I was the one who told you to dream big. It would be unfair if I asked you to dream smaller just to stay close to me. I smiled through fresh tears. You don't owe me anything, Daniel. Not your time. Not your money. Not even your guilt. You already gave me everything. The day you called me mom for the very first time, I became the richest woman alive. I stopped. My voice trembled. But there is one thing I'd like to ask. If you ever have children, hold them a little longer than necessary. Listen to their stories. Even if you've heard them before. Go to their school plays. Cheer louder than anyone else. And if one day they become embarrassed by your wrinkles or your old clothes, love them anyway. They'll understand someday. I promise. I wiped another tear. I already forgave you. I forgave you years ago. The day you asked me not to come to school. The day you introduced me as Eleanor. The day you couldn't say mom. I forgave every one of those moments. Before they even happened. Because love doesn't keep score. It simply stays. My voice cracked. I've been sick for a while now. I didn't tell you. Not because I didn't trust you. But because I wanted your happiest years to stay happy. If I made the wrong choice, I'm sorry. I was only trying to be your mother. A long silence filled the recording. Then I whispered the truth I'd carried for years. There was never a single day when I was ashamed of you. Not one. I hope one day you'll be able to say the same about me. I pressed my lips together to stop them from trembling. I love you, sweetheart. I always will. And if heaven lets mothers keep watching over their children, you're going to get very tired of me. I laughed softly. I'll probably still remind you to wear a jacket. The laugh turned into a cough. A painful one. When it finally stopped, I whispered my last words into the phone. Thank you for letting me be your mom. The recording ended. The room became silent once more. 3 days later, I slipped away quietly just before sunrise. Margaret was holding my hand. The nurse adjusted my blanket. The first rays of morning light crept through the curtains. It was peaceful. Almost beautiful. There were no dramatic last words. No speeches. Only one final smile. As if I had finally seen someone I'd been missing for a very long time. Daniel didn't answer the hospital's first call. Or the second. Or the third. His assistant finally reached him during a meeting. There has been an emergency. He arrived 4 hours later. Still wearing his expensive suit. His tie was slightly crooked. His hair looked as though he'd been running. Margaret was sitting alone in the waiting room. The moment she saw him, she stood. Neither of them spoke. Daniel looked around. Where's Mom? Margaret's eyes filled instantly. He looked past her toward the hallway. Can I see her? Margaret slowly nodded. He walked into the room. The machines had already been turned off. The flowers on the windowsill were still fresh. The blue knitted cap rested neatly beside the bed. His mother looked peaceful. Smaller somehow. Like the illness had taken everything except the kindness from her face. Daniel stood frozen. He waited. As though she might wake up if he gave her another minute. Mom. Nothing. He stepped closer. Mom. Still nothing. His knees gave out. He collapsed beside the bed. His hands shook as he reached for hers. They were cold. So very cold. No. His voice broke. No. You can't. He pressed his forehead against her hand. I'm here. I'm here now. You can wake up. I'm here. The room answered with silence. The silence became unbearable. Then he cried. Not quietly. Not politely. The kind of crying that tears itself out of your soul. Years of distance. Years of pride. Years of unsaid words. Came crashing down all at once. Margaret stood in the doorway. Tears streamed down her face. She wanted to comfort him. But there are some griefs that have to be carried alone. Several minutes later, Daniel noticed a small envelope lying on the bedside table. His name was written across it. In familiar handwriting. For my sweetheart. Inside was a single house key. And one folded note. It read, "Everything I ever had was yours long before I left. The house. The memories. The recipes in the kitchen drawer. Your father's watch in the bedroom. And every piece of my heart. There is only one thing that isn't inside this envelope. It's waiting for you on my phone. Please." His hands trembled so violently that he nearly dropped the letter. He looked toward Margaret. What phone? She quietly reached into her purse. Without saying a word, she placed Eleanor's old cell phone into his hands. The screen was scratched. The case was faded. It was the same inexpensive phone she had carried for years. Daniel pressed the power button. The battery slowly came to life. One notification appeared. One unheard voicemail saved. His thumb hovered over the screen. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear himself breathe. He had spent years avoiding his mother's voice. Now, it was the only sound in the world he wanted to hear. With tears blurring his vision, Daniel couldn't breathe. His thumb hovered over the screen for several seconds. The hospital room was completely silent. Even Margaret stopped crying. She simply stood behind him with her hands folded, knowing this moment belonged to a son, and the mother he had lost. Finally, he pressed play. A soft crackle filled the room. Then, his mother's voice. Gentle. Warm. Familiar. Exactly as it had been when she tucked him into bed every night. Hi, sweetheart. Daniel covered his mouth. Every wall he had built over the years collapsed in an instant. He closed his eyes. Suddenly he wasn't a successful attorney standing in a hospital room. He was 5 years old again. Curled beneath a blanket while his mother kissed his forehead before leaving for another night shift. The voicemail continued. She laughed about tickling his feet to wake him for school. She remembered his first missing tooth. His fear of thunderstorms. The day he proudly rode his bicycle without training wheels. She remembered everything. Even the moments he had forgotten. Then came the words that shattered him. There was never a single day when I was ashamed of you. Daniel's shoulders began shaking violently. I hope one day you'll be able to say the same about me. He let out a sound Margaret had never heard before. Not the cry of a grown man. Not even the cry of a grieving son. It was the cry of a little boy who suddenly realized he had spent years pushing away the one person who had loved him without conditions. When the voicemail ended with, "Thank you for letting me be your mom," the recording stopped. The screen went dark. Daniel stared at the phone. No. His voice cracked. No, please. He pressed play again. And again. And again. He listened to her voice 5 times before anyone could convince him to leave the hospital. Every time she laughed, he cried harder. Every time she called him sweetheart, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Every time she said she loved him, he answered through tears, "I love you too, Mom." But this time, she couldn't hear him. The funeral was held 3 days later. The church was far more crowded than Daniel expected. He had imagined a quiet service. A handful of neighbors. Maybe a few co-workers. Instead, the parking lot overflowed. People stood along the walls because every seat was filled. Daniel looked around in confusion. He didn't recognize most of them. An elderly woman approached first. "You must be Eleanor's son." He nodded. She smiled through tears. "Your mother brought groceries to my family every month after my husband lost his job." Daniel blinked. I didn't know." She squeezed his hand. "She made us promise never to tell anyone." Another man stepped forward. "I was homeless for almost a year." Daniel looked at him. "Your mother packed me a hot meal every Thursday." A young nurse wiped her eyes. "I became a nurse because of your mom." Daniel frowned. "How?" "When I was 16, I wanted to quit school. She sat with me for 3 hours. She told me the world needed kind people more than successful people." The nurse smiled. "I've worked in children's oncology for 12 years because of her." One story became another. Each carried a memory. Each carried a piece of Eleanor's kindness. Daniel stood frozen. His mother had never been wealthy. Never famous. Never powerful. Yet somehow, she had quietly changed hundreds of lives. And he had barely known the woman who raised him. After everyone left, Daniel remained alone beside her grave. The winter wind gently moved the flowers. He knelt in the snow. "I'm sorry." Silence. "I'm so sorry." He placed his hand on the cold headstone. "I kept chasing people who would forget my name someday, while I ignored the woman who whispered it with love every single day." His tears landed on the fresh earth. "I thought your clothes embarrassed me." He laughed bitterly. "No. My pride embarrassed me. I thought your wrinkles made you look old. They were proof of every sacrifice you made for me. I spent years trying to impress strangers, while breaking the heart that prayed for me every night." His voice disappeared into quiet sobs. "If I could trade everything, my career, my money, my house, my reputation, I'd give it all away. Just to hear you call me sweetheart one more time." The wind answered softly, almost like a gentle hand brushing across his face. A week later, Daniel returned to his mother's house. Not to sell it. To live in it. At least for a while. Every room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla. Her blue knitted cap rested beside the couch. Her reading glasses lay open on the kitchen table. A half-finished crossword puzzle waited exactly where she'd left it. He couldn't bring himself to move anything. In the kitchen drawer, he found dozens of handwritten recipe cards. Each one included tiny notes. "Daniel likes extra cinnamon. Don't overcook the chicken. He always notices. Make this when he's had a difficult day." Daniel sat on the kitchen floor and cried until sunset. Weeks turned into months. The ribbon was still tied exactly as she'd left it. Inside, on the very first page, he found her message. "For every victory you've earned, and every dream you haven't dreamed yet, never measure your success by the people who applaud you. Measure it by the people who feel safe when you walk into a room. If one day the whole world admires you, but the people who love you feel forgotten, you haven't truly won. Love always. Mom." Daniel pressed the notebook against his chest. He finally understood why she had never opened her own heart to anger. She had spent her life teaching lessons, even when he refused to learn them. Years passed. Daniel married Victoria. This time, before the wedding began, he walked alone into the small chapel. In the front row, he placed a framed photograph of his mother wearing the navy blue dress Margaret had bought her. He gently touched the frame. "You belong here." When his first daughter was born, the nurse asked, "What will her name be?" Daniel smiled through tears. "Eleanor." Every night, he read bedtime stories. He attended every school play. He never missed a birthday. When his daughter ran toward him with messy drawings and sticky little hands, he never looked at his watch. He looked into her eyes. Sometimes, she would ask, "Daddy, why do you hug me for so long?" He would smile. "Because someone once hugged me like this. And I didn't appreciate it until it was too late." As Eleanor grew older, he told her stories about the grandmother she would never meet. Not stories about illness or sadness. Stories about courage. About burnt pancakes that somehow tasted perfect. About Christmas mornings with second-hand presents wrapped like treasures. About a woman who believed that love was something you gave, not something you earned. Many years later, Daniel became an old man himself. His hair turned silver. His hands grew wrinkled. He sat on the porch of the little house his mother had saved for him. Beside him sat his grown daughter. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Dad? What's the most valuable thing Grandma ever left you?" Daniel smiled. Not toward the house. Not toward the sky. But toward the old cell phone he still carried in his pocket. Its battery no longer worked. Its screen had long gone dark. Yet he had never thrown it away. He held it gently. Her last voicemail. His daughter smiled. "You've listened to it a lot, haven't you?" He looked toward the sunset. "I've listened to it every Sunday. For 32 years. A warm breeze passed through the trees. Daniel closed his eyes. And for just a moment, he could almost hear her voice again. "Hi, sweetheart." He smiled through tears. "I finally understand, Mom. I was never successful because I became a lawyer. I became successful the day I learned how to love the way you loved me." The sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. But some kinds of love never set. They simply become the light we carry for the rest of our lives.